Good morning, and welcome to everyone here. It's good to see you all here today. So in the past few weeks, we sort of started off talking about metta, or kindness, friendliness, and used as a text the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And then last week talked about some of the difficulties, the practical difficulties of practicing kindness in a world that is not universally kind. So I thought I would bring this back more toward the Soto Zen tradition and discuss a text written by Dogen in the 13th century, which is entitled Four Methods of Guidance for the Bodhisattva. We talked about how in the early Buddhism tradition, the goal of the spiritual life was arhatship, or personal salvation. And as time went on and Buddhism, the spiritual path initiated by the teachings of the Buddha, evolved, there was perhaps some discomfort with this, what seemed to be kind of a self-centered motive for the spiritual life. And the archetype of the arhat was replaced with the archetype of the bodhisattva. Now, what's a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva, the archetype, is one who defers full salvation or awakening, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, until everyone else can come along, until all beings can enjoy that same benefit. And it's crystallized in the liturgy in the Mahayana tradition of the great vow, the Bodhisattva vow, which many of you are familiar with. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them all. Illusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. And the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. That's one translation of the Bodhisattva vow. The Bodhisattva vow goes back to at least the 8th century in China, and probably earlier than that. But it was recorded by Wei Neng. So, in a way, that sounds pretty grandiose. And if you were doing a psychiatric evaluation and someone told you that they vowed to free all beings and end all delusions and basically achieve perfect wisdom, that you might consider that a sign of some pathology. But the intention here is to point out a direction And that is in common with much of the Buddhist teachings, to point out a direction, because that's really, in some ways, all we need to know. If you're going in the right direction, eventually you'll reach the right destination without necessarily knowing where the destination is. And in a universe of uncertainty, just knowing the right direction to go is adequate knowledge. And in fact, when a destination is reached, it may not be obvious that you're there. Dogen says in another writing, when the Buddhas are truly Buddhas, they do not necessarily notice they are Buddhas. However, they are actualized Buddhas who go on actualizing Buddhas. And actually, sometimes thinking that you're at a destination can be a delusion. So the Bodhisattva vows point us in a direction, like much of these teachings. And the 4 methods of guidance of the Bodhisattva by Dogen really get into some of the details of of how you proceed. The language, as in much of Dogen's teaching, is poetic, which can be confusing, but also lends itself to a great degree of freedom, because there are many different ways to move in the same direction. Dogen starts off, the Bodhisattva's 4 methods of guidance are giving, kind speech, beneficial action, and what he calls identity action. And we'll get into a little bit of that. But I did, having talked about contrasted early Buddhism with Mahayana Buddhism, the similarities are much greater than the contrasts. And I'll illustrate that by reading a small section from a sutta from the Pali Canon, early Buddhism. Bhikkhus, there are 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. What 4? Giving, endearing speech, beneficent conduct, and impartiality. These are the 4 means of sustaining a favorable relationship. Giving, endearing speech, beneficent action, conduct, and impartiality under diverse worldly conditions, as is suitable to fit each case. These means of sustaining a favorable relationship are like the linchpin of a rolling chariot to keep the wheels from falling off. So really, these 4 methods of guidance for the Bodhisattva are very similar, if not almost identical, to the teachings in this early sutta. And I think this is true of many of the later Buddhist literature, that there is a considerable difference in emphasis and style, but great similarity in content. So Dogen, in offering these four guidances, helps us to understand. I mean, this whole notion of freeing all beings could be, how do you do that? Well, first of all, because we're confined in space and time, we have to more or less do things one at a time. But Dogen offers this advice, starting with giving. Giving means non-greed. Non-greed means not to covet. Not to covet means not to curry favor. Even if you govern the 4 continents, you should always convey the correct teaching with non-greed. It is to give away unneeded belongings to someone you don't know, to offer flowers blooming on a distant mountain to the Tathagata, or again, to offer treasures you had in your former life to sentient beings. Whether it is of teaching or of material things, each gift has its value and is worth giving. Even if the gift is not your own, there is no reason to keep from giving. The question is not whether the gift is valuable, but whether there is merit. Now, some of that language is a little confusing, so I would like to read an alternative translation. That one was by Tanahashi. And I believe this translation is by Nichiyama. So giving, let me see, almsgiving means not to covet or be greedy, not to flatter, adulate, nor curry favor. Even a king who controls the whole world must have giving if he wishes to propagandize the right way. Only by the virtue of giving can he build a peaceful world. The virtue of giving is like the virtue we grant to jewels and to people we do not know, without greed or malice. It is the same as offering a flower that blooms in the far mountains to Buddha, or offering precious jewels or a previous life to a sentient being. We possess in our original nature the virtue of giving alms spiritually and materially in each moment. Although in principle nothing belongs to self, we can still give alms. It is of no concern whether they are large or small. The important point is whether they can be beneficial to others. So a couple passages in the Tanahashi version translation I stumbled on was the one about even if it is not your own, you can still give it. That doesn't mean you can give things that belong to other people. It's clarified by the second translation that says, in truth, we don't own anything. And this is a traditional Buddhist teaching, is that the whole notion of possession is a delusion. Now, it may be a practical delusion that we use to order society, but in truth, we own nothing. But nonetheless, we can give. Another passage I stumbled upon was this idea of giving flowers blossoming on a distant mountain to the Buddha. How would one do that? Well, one way of doing that is to leave them alone. So I guess the way I interpret that is that it's kind of an environmentalist statement to, if there are flowers blooming on a distant mountain, you leave them alone so that all beings can enjoy them. So Dogen, in talking about giving, gives it a very expansive quality. It's not just material things. There are all kinds of ways of giving. Traditionally, in Buddhist teachings and early Buddhist teachings, there are sort of three categories: the giving of material objects, giving of the teaching of the Dhamma, and giving of no fear. Giving of no fear. In other words, being safe to be around, not scaring people in various ways. Other ways of giving besides material objects are just sort of acts of kindness, of just a smile or a friendly word, or a word of reassurance, or a gesture, or just remembering someone's name if you have a gift for that. Even if you don't, even more of a gift. And the value of a gift is not in its sort of market value, but in whether it produces the desired effect, produces a benefit for the receiver. Yeah, in the past week, some of you know, I as a volunteer, a couple days a week, drive a truck for the Ridner Food Pantry, and we were supposed to pick up this load from one of the groceries here in the area, and you never know what you're going to pick up from any given place. Sometimes it's either nothing or a small amount. Other times it's something huge. In this case, it was something huge, and it was 2 big pallets full of potatoes. Potatoes are very heavy when you get a bunch of them together, and you've probably seen those containers in the grocery store that where they bring out the watermelons in season. Well, one of those was just filled with potatoes, and they had 2 of them, and it's extremely heavy. And the docking facilities at this particular grocery store are not very user-friendly. So it was a real problem as to how to get these on the truck. And the person there who was the receiver, his name was Darian, was extremely helpful and converted an impossible problem, an impossible thing to do in my mind, to something that was done by virtue of his experience and his strength and his spirit. He had just a very positive attitude about things and showed no resentment whatsoever at doing something above and beyond his usual job duties. A tremendous gift. So giving, it can be an all-pervasive practice. And it doesn't require wealth or anything else, but just a spirit of giving. I wonder if there are any times during the past week that you can recall receiving something or giving something that was perhaps something you wouldn't ordinarily consider giving or a gift, but falls into this broad category that Dogen is talking about of giving. I think I'll stop there, and we'll break up into a couple groups and get back together in a few moments to discuss again.